Cold cases are crimes that remain unsolved, sometimes for decades, despite investigations, evidence, and public attention. Between 1900 and 2000, several cases became infamous not just for their mystery, but for how they continue to capture global interest. In this video, we'll examine 10 of the most disturbing cold cases of that century, from the cryptic messages of the Zodiac Killer to the unsolved hijacking of D.B. Cooper, and from the Black Dahlia murder to the Yuba County Five. Each story reveals unanswered questions and lasting impact. These are the cases that still demand attention today. Case 1. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in American history. His crimes took place in Northern California during the late 1960s and early 1970s, and his case has remained unsolved for more than 50 years. Law enforcement, amateur sleuths, and journalists have all studied the evidence, yet no suspect has ever been definitively proven to be the Zodiac. What makes this case especially memorable is not only the brutality of the murders, but also the taunting letters and cryptic ciphers the killer sent to the press and police, creating a lasting cultural and investigative puzzle. The Zodiac's first confirmed attack occurred on December 20, 1968, near Vallejo, California. Teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were parked on a quiet road when an unknown gunman approached their car. Faraday was shot once in the head at close range, and Jensen was shot multiple times in the back as she tried to flee. Both died at the scene. Investigators were left with little evidence and no immediate suspect, though this would later be recognized as the Zodiac's first confirmed crime. The second attack happened on July 4, 1969. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were parked at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo when they were ambushed by a gunman who fired multiple shots into the vehicle. Ferrin was killed, but Mageau survived despite serious injuries. Shortly afterward, a man called the Vallejo Police Department, claiming responsibility for both the Faraday-Jensen murders and the new shooting. He also provided details that had not been released to the public, proving the caller was the killer. In August 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald received letters from the Zodiac. Each letter included a part of a 408 symbol cipher and a demand that the newspapers print them or more killings would follow. The ciphers were a mixture of symbols, letters, and shapes. A California couple, Donald and Betty Harden, solved the first cipher. It revealed a disturbing message in which the Zodiac stated that he killed for pleasure and believed murder would send him to paradise. However, the cipher did not reveal his identity. The Zodiac struck again on September 27, 1969, near Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking when a man approached them wearing a hooded costume marked with a crosshair symbol on the chest. He tied both victims with rope before stabbing them repeatedly. Shepard later died from her wounds, but Hartnell survived. The killer left a message on Hartnell's car door, writing the dates of his previous attacks, along with his signature symbol. This was one of the most terrifying encounters, as it showed the Zodiac escalating his behavior with a planned attack and direct contact with the victims. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac committed his final confirmed murder. San Francisco cab driver Paul Stein was shot in the head by a passenger in the city's Presidio Heights neighborhood. Initially, police believed the shooting to be a routine robbery until the Zodiac sent a letter to the Chronicle taking credit. He included a piece of Stein's bloody shirt as proof. Several witnesses saw the killer leaving the scene, and police officers even briefly encountered a man who matched the description, but mistakenly let him go after assuming the suspect was African American due to an incorrect radio report. This error remains one of the most significant missed opportunities in the case. Over the next several years, the Zodiac sent more than 20 letters and postcards to newspapers, law enforcement, and even private citizens. Some included new ciphers, while others mocked investigators for failing to catch him. In one, he threatened to attack a school bus and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. This caused widespread fear, though no such attack ever took place. His letters also included references to pop culture, including the film The Most Dangerous Game, and his writing style suggested a killer who enjoyed public attention as much as the crimes themselves. The ciphers became a major part of the Zodiac mystery. While the first one was solved, others remained unsolved for decades. In 2020, a team of amateur codebreakers cracked the so-called 340 cipher, which had been sent to the Chronicle in 1969. It revealed a message denying the Zodiac was afraid of the gas chamber and continuing to boast about his crimes. Still, it contained no identifying information. Over the years, multiple suspects have been investigated. Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester, became the prime suspect after acquaintances reported his strange behavior and comments about killing. Police searched his home and found items that seemed suspicious, but no evidence directly tied him to the murders. DNA testing on stamps and envelopes linked to the Zodiac letters has so far failed to connect Allen or any other suspect definitively. Other names such as Richard Gaikowski, Lawrence Kane, and more recently Gary Francis Post have been proposed, but none has been proven. Post's name emerged in 2021 from a private group of investigators called the Case Breakers, but law enforcement has not confirmed this claim. The Zodiac case has remained open with the FBI and local police agencies. It continues to attract both professional investigators and amateur sleuths who pore over the evidence, ciphers, and letters. Despite technological advances, such as DNA profiling and digital analysis, no conclusive identification has been made. The fact that the Zodiac stopped killing, or at least stopped claiming responsibility for murders, adds another layer of mystery. Some believe he may have died or been imprisoned for another crime. Others think he simply grew tired of the attention. The cultural impact of the Zodiac case is enormous. It has inspired books, films, television series, and endless online discussions. The 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, brought the case to a new generation, emphasizing the frustration of investigators and journalists who pursued the killer but could not find answers. The Zodiac's use of coded messages, his taunting tone, and his ability to evade capture have made him a symbol of unsolved crime in America. What makes the Zodiac so disturbing is not only the violence of his confirmed murders, but also the possibility that he committed others that remain unattributed. Police have considered his involvement in several other unsolved crimes, though none has been proven. His ability to manipulate the media, create fear, and vanish without leaving solid evidence demonstrates how one individual can challenge the entire system of law enforcement. Today, more than half a century later, the Zodiac case remains open in California. It is a reminder of the limitations of even the most determined investigations. Families of the victims never received closure, and the killer's true identity remains unknown. For the public, the case continues to represent both the fascination and the frustration of cold cases. The idea that even with witnesses, letters, ciphers, and physical evidence, justice can remain out of reach. Case 2. The D.B. Cooper hijacking. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man using the name Dan Cooper purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. The flight was scheduled to travel from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. The ticket cost $20 and the man paid in cash. Described as being in his mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, wearing a dark suit, a black tie and a raincoat, he appeared calm and polite. He became known to history as D.B. Cooper after an early reporting error, and his case remains one of the most famous unsolved crimes in the United States. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Believing it to be a phone number, she initially ignored it. Cooper leaned toward her and quietly said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note stated that he had explosives in his briefcase. To prove it, he opened the case slightly, revealing what looked like red sticks attached to wires. He then calmly issued his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane. Schaffner informed the pilots, who relayed the situation to air traffic control and the FBI. The airline agreed to Cooper's demands. During the flight, passengers were unaware of the hijacking. Cooper was described by the crew as polite, soft-spoken, and calm. He even ordered bourbon and soda while waiting. Witnesses later emphasized that he did not seem nervous or aggressive, which contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the situation. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, where Cooper's demands were met. FBI agents delivered the ransom money in a bank bag containing 10,000 $20 bills, each with recorded serial numbers. They also provided 4 parachutes, 2 front reserve chutes and 2 main back parachutes. Cooper allowed the passengers to leave the plane once his demands were satisfied, but kept several crew members on board. He instructed the pilots to prepare for another flight, this time heading toward Mexico City. He ordered the aircraft to fly low at an altitude of 10,000 feet and at a slow speed of 200 miles per hour. He also demanded that the rear air stairs remain extended during flight. At approximately 8 p.m., after the plane had taken off again and was flying over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, Cooper put on one of the parachutes, secured the ransom money in a bag, and lowered the rear stairway. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, he jumped into the night. The crew felt a sudden shift in air pressure around 8:13 p.m., marking the moment when Cooper leaped from the plane. He was never seen again. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in American history. Thousands of law enforcement officers, military personnel, and volunteers searched the wooded areas of Washington and Oregon. Aircraft were dispatched to patrol the suspected landing zone. Despite these efforts, no trace of Cooper was found. Investigators could not determine exactly where he had landed due to poor weather, darkness, and uncertainty about the flight's exact path during the jump. Over time, several theories emerged. Some believed Cooper had died during the jump. The weather was stormy, and the terrain below was rugged with forests and rivers. He had no apparent survival gear and jumped in business attire. The FBI argued that an experienced parachutist would not have chosen the older parachute Cooper selected. Yet others argued that his detailed demands, such as specific flight speed and altitude, suggested some knowledge of parachuting or aviation. In 1980, a breakthrough seemed possible. A young boy found $5,800 in $20 bills buried along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to Cooper. This discovery, known as the Tina Bar Find, raised more questions than answers. Some suggested it proved Cooper had not survived, while others speculated he had buried or lost part of the money intentionally. Over the years, hundreds of suspects were investigated. One prominent suspect was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Army paratrooper who hijacked a plane in 1972 using similar methods. McCoy escaped with $500,000, but was later caught and killed during a prison escape attempt. The FBI ultimately ruled him out as Cooper, citing significant differences in description and evidence. Another was Kenneth Christensen, a former flight attendant with Northwest Airlines. Some circumstantial evidence pointed to him, but there was no conclusive proof. Dwayne Webber, a World War II veteran, confessed on his deathbed in 1995 that he was D.B. Cooper, but investigators found no supporting evidence. One of the most recent suspects was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army pilot with a history of criminal activity. A private group of investigators, known as the Citizen Sleuths, focused on him, arguing that his military background and personal history matched Cooper's profile. However, the FBI closed the case in 2016 without naming Rackstraw or anyone else as Cooper. The FBI officially suspended active investigation into the Cooper case in July 2016, though it remains technically open. Over its 45 years of investigation, the Bureau considered more than 800 suspects. Agents collected fingerprints, DNA samples from envelopes Cooper handled, and examined countless tips, but no conclusive evidence emerged. Cooper's identity and fate remain unknown. The D.B. Cooper hijacking has become a permanent fixture of American culture. It is the only unsolved case of air piracy in U.S. history. Books, films, and documentaries continue to revisit the story, analyzing evidence and suspects. The 2004 film, Without a Paddle, and references in shows like Prison Break and Breaking Bad highlight how the case remains embedded in popular imagination. The idea of a man leaping from a plane with stolen money and vanishing into the wilderness has fueled both fascination and conspiracy. What makes the case enduring is its combination of daring crime, mysterious escape, and lack of closure. Cooper left behind no body, no confirmed landing site, and no trail of money apart from the small stash found near the Columbia River. Some believe he survived, started a new life under a different identity, and successfully escaped justice. Others argue that the dangerous conditions made survival unlikely, and that his body lies somewhere in the forests of Washington. Either way, D.B. Cooper's name has entered legend. Law enforcement officers, journalists, and amateur sleuths continue to revisit the evidence, hoping that modern technology might one day provide answers. Yet after more than 50 years, the mystery remains unsolved, and Cooper E.S. leap into the stormy night of 1971 stands as one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. Case 3. The Black Dahlia Murder. On January 15, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was discovered in Los Angeles, California. Her murder became one of the most notorious unsolved cases of the 20th century. Nicknamed the Black Dahlia by the press, Short's case has been defined by both its brutality and its mystery. Despite decades of investigation, her killer has never been identified, and the crime remains one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. Elizabeth Short was born in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1924. She grew up during the Great Depression, a time of hardship for her family after her father abandoned them. As a young woman, she moved between Massachusetts, Florida, and California. In Los Angeles, she pursued a dream of becoming an actress, though she never secured major roles. Friends described her as striking, with dark hair, pale skin, and a preference for stylish clothing. The nickname Black Dahlia reportedly came from a combination of her appearance, her fashion sense, and a film playing at the time called The Blue Dahlia. The press later used the nickname in sensational headlines after her death. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a local woman named Betty Bersinger was walking with her daughter in a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles when she saw what she thought was a discarded mannequin. As she got closer, she realized it was the naked body of a young woman, gruesomely mutilated. The body had been cut in half at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with the arms raised above the head. There were also slashes at the corners of her mouth, creating a chilling Glasgow smile effect. Investigators quickly identified the victim as Elizabeth Short. The brutality of the crime scene shocked investigators and the public. The precision of the bisection suggested that the killer had some knowledge of anatomy or surgical skills. The body showed signs of torture before death, including cuts and bruises. However, there were few clues at the scene, and no blood was found, indicating that Short had been killed elsewhere and her body transported to the lot. The Los Angeles Police Department launched a massive investigation. More than 150 detectives were assigned, and the case generated widespread media attention. Newspapers competed for details, often sensationalizing the story and portraying Short as a femme fatale. Rumors spread about her personal life, some untrue, painting her unfairly as promiscuous or involved in criminal activity. This media frenzy both fueled public interest and complicated the investigation. Police received dozens of false confessions and investigated hundreds of suspects. One of the most prominent early suspects was Dr. George Hodel, a Los Angeles physician. In 1949, Hodel's daughter accused him of sexual abuse, and investigators began looking into his possible connection to the Short case. Wiretaps placed in his home recorded him making suspicious statements, including remarks about performing illegal abortions and comments that could be interpreted as incriminating. However, no charges were filed against Hodel in connection with the Black Dahlia. Decades later, Hodel's son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD detective, publicly argued that his father was the killer. His books and independent research reignited interest in the theory, though it remains disputed and unproven. Another suspect was Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who knew Short. Short had lived for a time in a house owned by Hansen, and some reports claimed she rejected his romantic advances. While police questioned him, they found no evidence linking him directly to the murder. Other suspects included various men who had dated Short, acquaintances from Hollywood, and drifters who fit vague descriptions. Over time, the number of potential suspects grew into the hundreds, with none conclusively tied to the crime. In the weeks following Short's death, the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received a series of letters from someone claiming to be the killer. One package contained personal belongings of Elizabeth Short, including her birth certificate, photos, and an address book. The envelope was carefully cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. This confirmed that whoever sent it had direct access to Short's property. Despite this, handwriting analysis and other forensic efforts did not lead to an arrest. The investigation stretched on for months, but eventually went cold. As years passed, tips and confessions continued to surface, but none provided credible leads. Several killers and criminals later claimed responsibility, but police ruled out most of them. The gruesome nature of the crime, the lack of solid evidence, and the interference of sensational media coverage all contributed to the case remaining unsolved. The Black Dahlia case had a lasting impact on both Los Angeles and American culture. The case highlighted issues of media exploitation, as newspapers often portrayed Short in scandalous ways, overshadowing her real life. It also exposed challenges in forensic investigation during the 1940s. With no DNA testing and limited forensic tools, investigators were unable to build the type of case that might be possible today. Modern investigators and amateur sleuths have revisited the case with new methods. Some believe DNA evidence from the letters or personal items might one day yield results, though contamination over time is a major obstacle. The LAPD still considers the case open, but acknowledges the chances of solving it diminish with each passing year. Many of the original detectives are long deceased, and the physical evidence may no longer be testable. Culturally, the Black Dahlia has inspired countless books, movies, and television shows. James Ellroy's novel The Black Dahlia, published in 1987, presented a fictionalized version of the crime and was later adapted into a film. True crime documentaries and podcasts continue to explore the case, analyzing suspects, evidence, and the role of the media. Elizabeth Short herself has become a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, representing both the vulnerability of young women drawn to Los Angeles and the city's history of unsolved crime. Despite decades of speculation, the Black Dahlia murder remains unsolved. Elizabeth Short's life, often overshadowed by the gruesome details of her death, was that of a young woman searching for opportunities during a difficult time. Friends and family remembered her as kind, hopeful, and ambitious. The tragedy of her death lies not only in the brutality of the crime, but in the fact that her story was consumed by sensational headlines. The Black Dahlia case endures as one of America's most haunting mysteries. It stands as a reminder of how violence, media, and unsolved questions can merge into a legend that persists for generations. Whether the killer was George Hodel, another suspect, or someone entirely unknown, the truth has remained hidden since 1947. For Elizabeth Short's family, and for history, the case represents both the promise of forensic progress and the reality that some crimes may never be solved. Case 4. The JonBenét Ramsey Murder. On December 26, 1996, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. The discovery shocked the nation. JonBenét was a child beauty pageant contestant, often seen in photographs and videos, dressed in pageant costumes and performing on stage. Her death became one of the most high-profile and controversial unsolved cases in modern American history. Despite extensive investigations, media coverage, and multiple theories, the case remains unsolved nearly 3 decades later. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, to John and Patsy Ramsey. The family was well off. John Ramsey was a successful businessman, and Patsy, a former beauty queen, was deeply involved in her daughter's pageant activities. The family lived in a large home in Boulder with JonBenét and her older brother Burke. On Christmas Day of 1996, the Ramseys attended a holiday party at a friend's home before returning for the night. The following morning, the case that would define their lives began. At around 5:30 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey reported finding a 2.5-page ransom note on the kitchen staircase. The note demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, an oddly specific amount that matched a bonus John Ramsey had recently received at work. The note was unusually long compared to typical ransom notes and included details suggesting familiarity with the family. Patsy immediately called the police, and officers arrived at the home. Friends and neighbors also came over, further complicating the crime scene by introducing contamination. Initially, police treated the case as a kidnapping. Officers instructed the family to avoid disturbing the house, but significant errors were made in securing the scene. For several hours, officers and visitors moved freely throughout the home. At around 1:00 p.m., John Ramsey and a family friend searching the basement discovered JonBenét's body. She was found covered with a white blanket, with tape over her mouth and a cord around her neck. A makeshift garrote had been used to strangle her, and her wrists were loosely tied. The ransom note was immediately considered suspicious, and the case shifted from kidnapping to homicide. The autopsy revealed JonBenét had died from strangulation and a skull fracture. The coroner also noted possible evidence of sexual assault, though later reports disputed whether this was definitive. DNA samples were collected from her clothing, but in 1996 forensic technology was limited and the DNA profile was partial. Investigators faced a complex situation with conflicting evidence and intense public scrutiny. From the beginning, suspicion fell on the Ramsey family. Police noted inconsistencies in their statements and questioned why the ransom note was written inside the house. suggesting the perpetrator had significant time and privacy. Handwriting analysis could not conclusively link the note to Patsy Ramsey, but experts debated similarities. Critics also questioned the family's behavior, including John Ramsey's decision to move the body, which compromised potential evidence. The unusual amount demanded in the note, $118,000, added to suspicions, as it seemed unlikely for an outsider to know that figure. At the same time, others argued the case pointed toward an intruder. A basement window was found broken, and there were indications someone could have entered the home. The DNA evidence recovered did not match any family members, and in later years, improvements in testing confirmed the presence of an unknown male profile. Supporters of the intruder theory argued that the ransom note, though unusual, could have been an attempt to mislead investigators or buy time. The case attracted massive media attention. The combination of a young beauty pageant contestant, a wealthy family, and the horrific crime created a media storm. Coverage often portrayed Patsy and John Ramsey as suspicious, fueling public opinion that they were involved. Tabloid headlines speculated about motives, while television programs dissected every detail. The Ramseys repeatedly denied involvement, insisting an intruder was responsible. They also criticized the Boulder Police Department for mishandling the investigation and leaking information to the press. Over the years, several theories emerged. Some believed Patsy accidentally killed JonBenét and staged the scene to cover it up. Others suggested Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old at the time, may have been involved, though police found no physical evidence to support this. The intruder theory gained traction when investigators linked the unknown DNA to male profiles not connected to the family. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney formally cleared the Ramsey family based on DNA testing, though critics argued the evidence was too limited to be conclusive. Law enforcement investigated numerous suspects, including local residents and individuals with histories of sexual violence. In 2006, a man named John Mark Carr confessed to JonBenét's murder. His confession drew international attention, but DNA testing quickly ruled him out. The false confession highlighted the challenges of such a high-profile case, where individuals sometimes seek notoriety by claiming responsibility. Forensic advances have kept hope alive that the case might one day be solved. In recent years, investigators have considered applying advanced DNA techniques, such as genetic genealogy, which helped solve the Golden State Killer case. The partial DNA profile from JonBenét's clothing could potentially be used to identify relatives of the perpetrator. However, as of today, no match has been made, and the case remains officially unsolved. The impact of JonBenét's murder has been lasting. It exposed weaknesses in the handling of major crime scenes, as the Boulder Police Department's missteps became a cautionary tale for future investigations. It also illustrated how media attention can shape public opinion and complicate justice. The case inspired countless books, documentaries, and television specials, each presenting theories and suspects, but no definitive answers. For the Ramsey family, the tragedy was life-altering. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006 after a long battle with cancer, still maintaining her innocence. John Ramsey has continued to speak publicly about the case, advocating for the use of new DNA technologies. Burke Ramsey has also lived under public suspicion, despite the lack of evidence against him. The family's life after 1996 has been defined by a crime that never reached resolution. What makes the JonBenét Ramsey case particularly disturbing is the combination of brutality and mystery. A young child was killed inside her own home on Christmas night, a place where she should have been safest. Despite the resources devoted to the case, the involvement of federal agencies, and decades of attention, the question of who killed JonBenét remains unanswered. The ransom note, the DNA evidence, and the conflicting theories continue to fuel debate. For many, JonBenét's case symbolizes the frustration of cold cases, clear evidence of a crime, but no closure for the victim or her family. As technology advances, there remains hope that science might one day provide an answer. Until then, JonBenét Ramsey's murder remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases of the 20th century. Case 5. The Boy in the Box. On February 25, 1957, a man searching for muskrat traps in a wooded area of Fox Chase, Philadelphia, discovered a large cardboard box. Inside was the body of a young boy, wrapped in a plaid blanket. The child had been brutally beaten and showed signs of neglect. He was estimated to be between 3 and 7 years old. This unidentified child became known as the Boy in the Box, or America's Unknown Child. For decades, despite intensive efforts, his identity and the circumstances of his death remained a mystery. It was only in 2022 that investigators were finally able to name him, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. When the body was first discovered, the child was naked, his hair crudely cut, and his small body bore multiple bruises. An autopsy determined he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The child's emaciated condition suggested long-term malnutrition. He also had scars from what appeared to be medical procedures, including one on his ankle and another near his groin. Investigators noted that his fingernails and toenails had been recently trimmed, adding to the mystery of whether someone had attempted to care for him before his death. The cardboard box in which the child was found had originally contained a baby bassinet sold by J.C. Penney. Police tracked the box to a store in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, but records did not lead to any useful suspect. The blanket used to wrap the child was traced to a manufacturer in North Carolina, though it had been sold widely and yielded no solid leads. Investigators canvassed the area extensively, distributing over 400,000 flyers with the child's photograph. The case received national media coverage, but no one came forward to identify him. Early theories included the possibility that the child had been abandoned at an orphanage or foster home. Detectives investigated dozens of institutions in Pennsylvania and surrounding states, but none reported a missing child matching his description. Another theory suggested that he was a victim of human trafficking or an illegal adoption, though no evidence confirmed this. Despite extensive publicity, the lack of identification stalled the investigation. The case generated thousands of tips over the years. One of the more widely publicized theories emerged in 2002, when a woman known as Martha claimed her abusive mother had purchased the boy and later killed him. According to Martha, her mother had kept the boy hidden in their home before murdering him in a fit of rage. However, investigators could not corroborate her claims, and her story was inconsistent with other evidence. Still, it demonstrated the level of public interest in solving the mystery. Another lead came from a foster home located not far from where the body was found. Investigators discovered that foster children had played near the area in the past, and some circumstantial evidence suggested a possible connection. However, again, no direct link could be proven, and the case remained unsolved. As forensic science advanced, investigators exhumed the boy's body in 1998 to collect DNA samples. Later, in 2019, another exhumation allowed for more advanced DNA profiling. These efforts eventually led to a breakthrough. Using genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer, investigators built a family tree based on DNA collected from the boy's remains. In December 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department publicly announced that the boy had finally been identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Joseph had been born on January 13, 1953, in Philadelphia. His parents were identified through DNA as well, though investigators did not initially release their names out of respect for surviving relatives. Later records revealed that his parents, Augustus J. Gus Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Abel, were both deceased by the time of the announcement. The revelation brought closure to the question of the boy's identity, but did not resolve who killed him or why. Police emphasized that the homicide investigation remains active. Knowing Joseph's identity opened new avenues, including examining his family history and surviving relatives. Investigators hope that by reconstructing Joseph's early life, they may uncover details leading to his killer. However, after more than 60 years, many witnesses and possible suspects are long deceased, making the challenge of solving the case significant. The Boy in the Box case captured the nation's attention not only because of its brutality, but also because of the haunting image of a nameless child. For decades, his gravestone read simply, "America's Unknown Child." Volunteers, investigators, and local residents visited his grave regularly, leaving flowers and stuffed animals as a symbol of remembrance. His story was retold in documentaries, books, and television programs. The anonymity of the victim made the crime particularly tragic. Not only had he been murdered, but for decades, no one even knew his name. The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli marked a major achievement in forensic science. It demonstrated the power of genetic genealogy to solve long-standing mysteries, even when decades have passed. Investigators credited the dedication of forensic experts, genealogists, and law enforcement officers who refused to let the case fade into obscurity. While Joseph's identity is now known, the search for justice continues. The case also underscores the challenges of child abuse investigations during the mid-20th century. At the time, child protection services were less developed and records of missing children were incomplete. The fact that Joseph's disappearance went unreported illustrates how vulnerable children could fall through the cracks. His death remains a symbol of the need for vigilance in protecting children and ensuring their voices are not lost. Culturally, the Boy in the Box case has become one of the most studied unsolved murders in American history. It appears in true crime documentaries and academic studies of forensic science. It has been cited in discussions about unidentified victims and the use of technology in solving crimes. Most importantly, it has become a reminder that every victim deserves a name and recognition, no matter how much time has passed. Today, Joseph Augustus Zarelli's name is etched on his gravestone, replacing the words, "Unknown Child." The identification brought closure to part of the mystery, but questions remain. Who killed Joseph? Why was his death so brutal, and why did no one come forward at the time? Investigators continue to search for answers, with hope that surviving relatives or records may still provide the missing pieces. The Boy in the Box case illustrates both the limitations and possibilities of criminal investigation. For decades, the crime seemed destined to remain unsolved. Yet advancements in DNA technology gave Joseph back his identity. His story is no longer just that of America's unknown child, but of a real boy whose life was tragically cut short. Whether justice will ever be achieved remains uncertain, but Joseph's name and story will endure as one of the most haunting cold cases of the 20th century. Case 6. The Somerton Man, 1948, Australia. On December 1, 1948, the body of an unidentified man was discovered on Somerton Beach, near Adelaide, South Australia. He was well dressed in a suit and polished shoes, but carried no identification. The case became known as the Somerton Man mystery, or the Tamam Shud case, after a scrap of paper with those words was later found hidden in his clothing. More than 70 years later, despite forensic breakthroughs and new identifications, questions about the circumstances of his death remain unresolved, making it one of the world's most enduring cold cases. The discovery occurred early in the morning, when passers-by noticed a man slumped against a seawall. At first they assumed he was sleeping, but later it became clear he was dead. Police determined he had no obvious injuries. His suit and shoes were clean, suggesting he had not been on the beach long. Inside his pockets, investigators found items such as chewing gum, bus tickets and matches, but no wallet or identification. In fact, all the labels on his clothing had been removed, further deepening the mystery. The autopsy revealed unusual findings. The man's organs showed signs of congestion and his stomach contained blood, leading the pathologist to suspect poisoning. However, toxicology tests could not identify any substance. Some experts argued that certain poisons available at the time could have left no trace. His hands and nails were unmarked, suggesting he had not struggled. His strong build and healthy condition indicated he was not a transient, but rather someone accustomed to professional or skilled work. A few weeks later, police made a strange discovery that gave the case its nickname. Hidden in a small pocket of the man's trousers was a rolled scrap of paper with the words "Tamam shud," a Persian phrase meaning "it is finished" or "the end." The paper was traced to a book of Persian poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Investigators appealed to the public, and eventually a local man turned in a copy of the book that had been found in his car. The missing section matched perfectly with the scrap of paper in the Somerton Man's pocket. Inside the book were several lines of code-like writing and a phone number belonging to a woman living nearby. The woman, known publicly only as Jestin for many years, was a nurse named Jessica Thompson. She lived in Glenelg, not far from Somerton Beach. When shown a plaster cast of the Somerton Man's face, Thompson appeared visibly shocked, but denied knowing him. Later speculation suggested that she may have had some connection, though she refused to elaborate. Some theories proposed that the man could have been a spurned lover, while others suggested espionage, given the Cold War context of the time. The mysterious code in the Rubaiyat fueled speculation about intelligence links, but professional codebreakers were unable to make sense of it. The Somerton Man's body was embalmed, and a plaster cast of his head and upper body was made before burial, as investigators hoped he might one day be identified. Despite extensive searches, including international inquiries, no missing persons reports matched his description. Fingerprints and dental records yielded no results. The case became one of Australia's most baffling mysteries, attracting worldwide attention. Over the decades, numerous theories arose. Some believed he was a spy, pointing to the Cold War atmosphere, the code in the book, and the connection to a nurse possibly linked to intelligence operations. Others suggested suicide, perhaps linked to a failed relationship with Thompson. The poisoning theory remained strong, but without clear evidence, it could not be proven. Investigators were left with an unidentified body, a cryptic message, and a trail of inconclusive leads. The case remained dormant for years, but advances in forensic science revived interest. In 2009, Adelaide University researcher Derek Abbott began a private investigation analyzing photographs, records, and DNA. Abbott proposed that the Somerton Man may have had a genetic condition called hypodontia, affecting his teeth, and simian crease features in his hands, which could narrow identification. He also pursued the possibility of linking him to Jessica Thompson's son, Robin, whose physical traits bore similarities. Robin became a professional ballet dancer, and Abbott noted similarities in calf and ear shape. Abbott later married Robin's daughter, Rachel, and together they pushed for exhumation and advanced DNA testing. In May 2021, South Australian authorities exhumed the Somerton Man's body to attempt modern forensic analysis. The following year, Abbott announced that genealogical DNA work had identified the Somerton Man as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker born in Melbourne in 1905. Webb had a history of separation from his family and personal struggles, but no death record had been located before. The identification provided the Somerton Man with a name, but it did not answer the central mystery: how and why he died on a beach in Adelaide. Even with Webb's identity confirmed, major questions remain. Why were the labels removed from his clothing? Why did he carry a rare book with a coded message? What was his connection, if any, to Jessica Thompson? And what caused his death? Was it suicide, murder, or natural causes misinterpreted as poisoning? Investigators have yet to resolve these points. The Somerton Man case continues to fascinate because it combines classic elements of mystery: an unidentified victim, cryptic codes, possible espionage, and an unexplained death. It has been the subject of books, documentaries, and countless amateur investigations. For Australians, it represents one of the most famous unsolved cases in the nation's history, and for the world, it stands as an example of how some mysteries resist resolution despite decades of effort. The identification of Carl Webb in 2022 was a significant step, ending the mystery of who the Somerton Man was. Yet closure remains elusive because the circumstances of his death are still unclear. Whether he died by suicide, accident, or foul play may never be definitively proven. For now, the case sits at the intersection of solved identity and unsolved death, a reminder of how answers can lead to more questions. The Somerton Man's story endures because it illustrates both the progress of forensic science and its limits. A name was restored to a man who lay nameless for more than 70 years, but the full truth remains hidden. His death on Somerton Beach remains one of the 20th century's most enduring cold case mysteries. Case 7. The Sodder Children Disappearance, 1945 USA. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a fire broke out at the home of George and Jenny Sodder in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodders had 10 children. That night, 9 of them were at home. When the fire consumed the house, 5 of the children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were believed to have died inside. Yet no remains were ever found. For decades, their disappearance has been one of America's strangest and most unsettling cold cases. The Sodder family was well known in Fayetteville. George Sodder, an Italian immigrant, owned a successful trucking business. He and his wife Jenny raised their children in a 2-story wood-frame home. On Christmas Eve, the children excitedly opened gifts before heading to bed. Around midnight, Jenny was awakened by the phone ringing. The caller asked for someone who did not live there, then laughed and hung up. Jenny noticed the lights were still on and the doors unlocked, which was unusual. She turned everything off and returned to bed. About an hour later, Jenny awoke again, this time to the smell of smoke. She discovered a fire in George's office near a fuse box and telephone line. The parents quickly gathered some of the children and escaped. 4 children made it out, along with George and Jenny, but the 5 younger children upstairs did not. George attempted to rescue them, but strange obstacles prevented his efforts. His ladder, normally kept by the house, was missing. His trucks, which he tried to use to climb to the windows, would not start. Neighbors called the fire department, but the response was delayed until morning. By then, the house was completely destroyed. The official explanation was that the 5 missing Sodder children had perished in the fire. Authorities concluded that faulty wiring caused the blaze and that the bodies had been cremated in the intense heat. However, the Sodder parents refused to accept this conclusion. They pointed to the fact that no human remains were ever found in the ashes. Experts agreed that even in a house fire, bones are usually left behind. In addition, the family had noticed other strange details in the days leading up to the fire. George had recently argued with a local insurance salesman who threatened that his house would, go up in smoke, and his children would be destroyed because of George's outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. The Sodders were known to oppose Mussolini, while some in their community supported him. After the fire, witnesses reported seeing a man stealing a block and tackle from the Sodder property. Others claimed they had seen the missing children alive after the fire. A woman reported seeing them in a passing car as the fire burned, while another said she saw them at a rest stop cafe the next morning. The fire's cause also raised suspicion. The house's wiring had recently been inspected and declared safe, yet investigators concluded faulty wiring caused the blaze. Telephone repair workers later confirmed the phone line had been deliberately cut. The ladder George tried to use to rescue his children was found thrown down an embankment far from the house. The family dogs, who usually barked at strangers, were strangely quiet that night. In the years following, George and Jenny pursued every possible lead. They wrote to the FBI, asking for help. Director J. Edgar Hoover replied that he would assist if local authorities approved, but the Fayetteville police declined. The Sodders hired private investigators, posted billboards offering rewards, and followed tips across the country. In 1949, they persuaded officials to re-examine the case. Excavations of the fire site uncovered a few small bone fragments, but these were determined to belong to animals, not children. Pathologists confirmed that no human remains were present. Perhaps the most haunting development came in 1967, when Jenny received an envelope postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s who resembled Louis Sodder, the child who had been 9 at the time of the fire. On the back was written, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Elil boys, A90132 or 35. The cryptic message only deepened the mystery. The Sodders believed the photo showed their son grown up. They hired another investigator to follow the lead, but he vanished, leaving the family with no further answers. Theories about what happened to the Sodder children vary widely. Some suggest they were kidnapped as retaliation for George's political views. Others argue the mafia was involved, possibly abducting the children to intimidate George. Some believe the children were trafficked or adopted into other families. Skeptics argue that the fire could have destroyed their bodies more completely than expected, though experts maintain that even in extreme heat, bones should have survived. The complete absence of remains, combined with the suspicious circumstances, has kept the abduction theory alive. Over the years, the Sodder case became part of American folklore. The family's determination to find answers captured national attention. The billboard George erected along Route 16, featuring photos of the missing children and an appeal for information, remained standing for decades. Visitors passing through Fayetteville saw the sign, a symbol of unresolved tragedy and the family's refusal to give up hope. George and Jenny devoted their lives to the search, investigating every tip until their deaths. George died in 1969, Jenny in 1989. Both maintained until the end that their children had survived the fire. The surviving Sodder children carried the mystery forward. Some pursued leads into adulthood, while others preferred to move on quietly. Theories continued to circulate, fueled by documentaries, true crime articles, and the enduring enigma of the case. No definitive evidence has ever emerged to prove whether the children died in the fire or were taken that night. What makes the Sodder children disappearance so disturbing is the combination of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. 5 children vanished in a single night, and despite decades of investigation, their fate remains unknown. The evidence against the official conclusion of death in the fire is compelling. The cut phone line, the missing ladder, the non-functional trucks, the absence of remains, and reported sightings afterward. Yet the alternative theories all face the same problem: a lack of hard proof. The case remains officially closed, but for many it stands as one of the most perplexing cold cases in American history. It represents the limits of mid-20th century investigation and the pain of families left without closure. For the Sodders, the tragedy was compounded by suspicion, secrecy, and the possibility that their children lived and died without ever being returned. Today, the case is remembered not just as a mystery, but as a haunting story of loss and unanswered questions. Case 8. The Villisca Axe Murders, 1912, USA. On the morning of June 10, 1912, the small town of Villisca, Iowa, awoke to a crime so brutal it shocked the entire nation. 8 people, including 6 children, were found murdered in their beds inside the Moore family home. Each had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. The case, known as the Villisca Axe Murders, remains unsolved more than a century later. Its combination of brutality, mystery, and the failure to identify a killer has made it one of America's most disturbing cold cases. The victims included Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5, and 2 overnight guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, aged 12 and 8. The Stillinger sisters had attended church with the Moore children the evening before and had been invited to stay overnight. By morning, the entire household had been murdered. The discovery was made by a neighbor, Mary Peckham, who noticed the house was unusually quiet. When Josiah's brother arrived and entered the home, he found the horrific scene: the family and their guests bludgeoned to death, their heads covered with sheets or clothing. Investigators determined that the murders occurred sometime after midnight. The weapon, an axe belonging to Josiah Moore, was found at the scene. All the curtains in the house had been drawn, and several mirrors and windows were covered with clothing, suggesting the killer attempted to block light or avoid seeing his reflection. A plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water were found in the kitchen, indicating the killer may have cleaned up before leaving. The methodical and deliberate staging of the scene suggested a calculated act rather than a random intrusion. The brutality of the murders shocked the town. Each victim had been struck multiple times, and Josiah in particular suffered blows so severe that his head was unrecognizable. Investigators noted that the killer seemed to have used the blunt end of the axe for many of the attacks. The violence suggested rage, but the lack of robbery or sexual assault pointed to a personal or psychological motive rather than financial gain. Suspicion initially focused on several potential suspects. One was Frank F. Jones, a wealthy local businessman and Iowa state senator. Josiah Moore had previously worked for Jones before starting his own farm equipment business, taking with him a valuable John Deere dealership. This caused lasting tension between the two men. Some believed Jones may have hired someone to kill Moore. A man named William Mansfield was later investigated as a potential hired killer. Mansfield was a suspect in other axe murders in Illinois and Kansas, leading some to suspect he was a traveling serial killer. However, no evidence directly tied him to Villisca. Another suspect was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had attended the same church service as the Moore family on the night of the murders. Kelly was described as eccentric and unstable. He left town early the next morning on a train, reportedly telling fellow passengers that there were 8 bodies back in Villisca before news of the murders had spread. Years later, Kelly confessed to the crime during an interrogation, but he soon recanted. His confession was inconsistent and likely coerced. He was tried for the murders in 1917, but acquitted due to lack of evidence. Investigators also considered the possibility that the Villisca murders were connected to other axe killings in the Midwest during the same period. Between 1911 and 1912, a series of unsolved axe murders occurred in Illinois, Kansas, and Colorado. Some criminologists later suggested that a single serial killer, sometimes referred to as the Axeman of the Midwest, could have been responsible for all of them, including Villisca. However, this theory has never been proven. The investigation was hampered by the limitations of early 20th century forensic science. Fingerprint analysis was in its infancy, and DNA testing did not exist. The crime scene was also compromised almost immediately. News of the murders spread quickly, and curious townspeople entered the house before investigators could secure it. Dozens of people walked through the crime scene, disturbing potential evidence. This contamination made it nearly impossible to conduct a proper forensic examination. The lack of resolution deeply affected the community. Villisca, once a quiet farming town, became associated with one of the most infamous crimes in American history. For decades, locals debated the identity of the killer, but no definitive answers emerged. The failure of the legal system to convict anyone created frustration and suspicion, leaving residents uneasy about whether the killer had been one of their own neighbors. Over the years, the Villisca Axe Murders continued to attract attention from historians, true crime writers, and paranormal investigators. The Moore home, preserved as a historic site, is now open to the public. Tours of the house detail the crime and its investigation, and some visitors claim the house is haunted. While such claims are not evidence, they highlight how the case has entered American folklore. The home stands as a physical reminder of the crime and its unanswered questions. Modern researchers have revisited the case, analyzing surviving evidence and historical records. Some believe Reverend Kelly remains the most likely suspect due to his unusual behavior and early knowledge of the crime. Others argue Mansfield was responsible, linking him to a broader pattern of axe murders across state lines. Still others believe someone within the community, possibly connected to the business rivalry between Moore and Jones, arranged the murders. Without definitive forensic evidence, however, these theories remain speculation. What makes the Villisca Axe Murders particularly disturbing is the vulnerability of the victims. An entire family, including young children and their guests, was killed in the supposed safety of their own home. The sheer brutality of the crime and the lack of resolution turned it into a legend of horror. Unlike many cold cases where a single victim is involved, Villisca represented a mass killing in a small-town setting, making it feel even more shocking. More than a century later, the case is still unsolved. Local historians and true crime enthusiasts continue to investigate, hoping modern technology might one day provide answers. Yet much of the evidence has been lost, and the chances of solving the case are slim. For the victims, justice was never served. For the community, the murders remain a dark chapter that still defines Villisca's history. The Villisca Axe Murders remain one of the most infamous cold cases in America. They highlight the limitations of early criminal investigations and the devastating impact of violent crime on small communities. The unanswered questions, who committed the murders, why they targeted the Moore family, and whether the crime was part of a larger pattern, ensure the case remains part of true crime history. For many, it stands as a chilling reminder that some mysteries, no matter how thoroughly examined, may never be solved. Case 9. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, 1959, USSR. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union, set out on a skiing expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the group planned a 16-day trek that would cover challenging terrain in winter conditions. All members were young, physically fit, and skilled in outdoor survival. When they failed to return on schedule, search teams were sent. What rescuers discovered has since become one of the most famous and disturbing mysteries of the 20th century, known today as the Dyatlov Pass Incident. The group, consisting of 8 men and 2 women, began their journey in late January. One member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and returned home early, unknowingly saving his life. The rest continued, carrying supplies, diaries and cameras. On February 1st, they set up camp on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, a mountain whose name translates to Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language. That night, something happened that led to their deaths. Searchers located the abandoned campsite on February 26. The hikers' tent was found partially collapsed, cut open from the inside. Their belongings, including boots, coats and food, were still inside, suggesting they had fled suddenly and under duress. Tracks in the snow indicated some of the hikers left barefoot or in socks, moving away from the tent toward a wooded area nearly a mile downhill. What rescuers found further down shocked them. Near the edge of the forest, 2 bodies, those of Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were discovered under a cedar tree. They were dressed in only underwear and socks. The tree showed signs of broken branches up to several meters, as if someone had climbed it, possibly to look back toward the tent. A fire had been lit nearby, suggesting they tried to stay warm. 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin, were found at varying distances between the cedar tree and the tent. Their positions suggested they had been attempting to crawl or stagger back toward camp. Slobodin had a fractured skull, though investigators concluded it was not fatal. Like the first 2 victims, they wore inadequate clothing for the freezing conditions. The remaining 4 hikers were not found until May, when snow melted in a ravine deeper in the forest. These bodies, those of Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Zina's brother Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol, showed more severe injuries. Thibault Brignol had a massive skull fracture, while Zolotaryov and Dubinina suffered broken ribs and internal injuries consistent with extreme force, similar to a car crash. Dubinina's body was missing her tongue and eyes, likely due to natural decomposition and scavenging by animals. Unlike the others, these 4 wore some additional clothing, possibly taken from their dead companions. The investigation raised more questions than answers. The cause of death was officially listed as hypothermia for most victims, but 3 were noted to have fatal injuries inconsistent with simple exposure. No signs of struggle with outsiders were found, and the tracks leading from the tent suggested only the hikers were present. Radiation traces were found on some clothing, which fueled speculation about military involvement. Autopsy results described some injuries as if caused by a force of great magnitude, though without external wounds. The Soviet authorities quickly closed the case, citing the deaths as caused by an unknown compelling force. Files were classified, adding to suspicion. The lack of transparency in the Soviet Union at the time led to rumors of cover-ups. Families of the victims were left without clear answers, and speculation grew both within the USSR and abroad. Over time, multiple theories emerged. Some suggested an avalanche forced the hikers to flee their tent, though critics argued the slope was too shallow and evidence of snowslide was lacking. Others believed infrasound, low-frequency wind patterns capable of inducing panic, may have played a role. Military testing theories pointed to parachute mines or secret weapons being tested in the area. The discovery of radiation traces reinforced this possibility, though it could also be explained by the students' exposure to radioactive materials in their university studies. Supernatural explanations also circulated, including UFO sightings and the involvement of the local Mansi people, though investigators found no evidence of foul play by outsiders. The fact that some hikers were found with severe trauma while others died of exposure has kept debate alive for decades. Survivors' diaries and photographs recovered from the site provided some insights into the trip, but offered no explanation for the final night. The case became public knowledge after the fall of the Soviet Union, leading to renewed interest worldwide. In 2019, Russian prosecutors reopened the case, applying modern investigative techniques. In 2020, they concluded the most likely cause was an avalanche. They argued that heavy snow, combined with the hikers' placement of their tent on a slope, led to a delayed slide that forced them to cut their way out and flee. Injuries sustained in the ravine were attributed to the impact of snow and rocks. Many researchers, however, remain unconvinced, pointing out inconsistencies, such as the lack of clear avalanche evidence at the site. Forensic modeling and modern avalanche simulations published in 2021 provided some support for the avalanche theory. Scientists suggested a slab avalanche, where a block of compacted snowslides could have occurred, matching both the timeline and the injuries described. Still, skeptics argue that it does not explain all details, such as the missing soft tissues, the pattern of clothing distribution, and the radiation traces. What makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbing is the combination of physical evidence and unanswered questions. The hikers were experienced and well prepared, yet they fled their tent in freezing conditions without proper clothing. Some suffered trauma far beyond what hypothermia would cause. The official conclusion of an unknown force left the case open to endless speculation. Even with modern science, no single theory has satisfied all the inconsistencies. The Dyatlov Pass tragedy has left a lasting cultural mark. It has inspired documentaries, films, and books, each presenting theories from scientific to supernatural. It has become a symbol of the unknown, a story where young lives full of promise ended in a way that defies full explanation. Families of the victims have long sought closure, though many passed away before any answers emerged. Today, Dyatlov Pass is a memorial site. Tourists and researchers visit to honor the memory of the 9 hikers: Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Krivonishenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. While science may one day offer clearer answers, for now the incident remains one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Case 10. The Yuba County Five, 1978, USA. On February 24, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, vanished under mysterious circumstances. Known today as the Yuba County Five, their disappearance and the later discovery of 4 of their bodies remain one of the most puzzling cold cases in American history. The combination of unusual circumstances, unexplained decisions, and unanswered questions has led investigators and the public to compare the case to the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia. To this day, no definitive explanation has emerged. The 5 men were friends: Gary Mathias, 25, Bill Sterling, 29, Jack Hewitt, 24, Ted Wire, 32, and Jack Madruga, 30. Each had mild intellectual or psychiatric challenges, but were high-functioning, independent, and active in their community. On February 24th, they traveled 50 miles north to Chico to watch a college basketball game. They left in Madruga's turquoise Mercury Montego after the game ended around 10 p.m. and stopped at a convenience store for snacks. That was the last confirmed sighting of all 5 together. When the men did not return home, their families reported them missing. Search efforts began quickly. Days later, the Montego was found abandoned on a remote mountain road near Oroville, far from their route home. The car was in good condition, not stuck in snow, with enough fuel to continue. Investigators noted it appeared to have been intentionally stopped rather than broken down. The keys were missing, and there were no footprints leading away from the car, likely erased by snowfall. Months passed with no trace of the men. Then, in June 1978, a group of motorcyclists discovered a U.S. Forest Service trailer near Rogers Cow Camp, about 20 miles from where the car was abandoned. Inside was the body of Ted Wire. He had survived for an extended period, perhaps up to 13 weeks, but eventually died of starvation and exposure. He had lost more than 80 pounds, and his beard growth indicated a prolonged survival period. Wire's body was found on a bed, wrapped in sheets, suggesting he had been cared for, at least initially. Yet, despite the trailer containing canned food, clothing, and heating materials, little had been used. Searchers soon found the remains of Sterling and Madruga in the woods between the car and the trailer. Both had died of hypothermia. Their bodies were partially consumed by animals, leaving only bones. Not far from them, the skeletal remains of Jack Hewitt were found. All 4 men had perished in the wilderness. The 5th man, Gary Mathias, was never found. Only his tennis shoes were discovered inside the trailer, suggesting he may have left at some point, possibly in search of help. His disappearance remains one of the central mysteries of the case. Investigators struggled to explain why the 5 men had driven so far out of their way into the mountains on a cold February night. None of them were familiar with the area. Their families insisted they would not have willingly taken such a detour. The car's location, on a road at 4,400 feet elevation, was particularly strange given their intended route south to Yuba City. Why they abandoned the car rather than driving back was another unanswered question. The conditions in the trailer deepened the mystery. Authorities noted that canned food and other survival supplies were present, yet the men either did not know how or chose not to use them. The heating system was intact but never used. Wire, who survived the longest, may have been unable to open the cans because the group lacked a can opener. Some cans had been opened, possibly by forcing them with knives or other tools, but the supplies should have sustained them far longer than they lasted. Theories about the case vary. One theory suggests the men became lost after missing a turn on the way home and drove aimlessly until they ended up in the mountains. Once snow blocked the road, they may have panicked, abandoned the car, and tried to find shelter. However, this does not explain why they did not use the supplies in the trailer effectively. Another theory involves Gary Mathias. Unlike the others, Mathias had a history of psychiatric illness, including schizophrenia, though he was managing it with medication at the time. Some speculate he may have influenced the group's decisions. His disappearance and the presence of only his shoes in the trailer suggest he may have left to seek help, but never returned. However, no remains or further evidence of him have ever been discovered. There is also the possibility of foul play. Some locals claimed the men were chased into the mountains or threatened. Witnesses reported seeing the group in a truck stop or rest area on the night of their disappearance, though accounts were inconsistent. One man later told investigators he had seen the group car on the mountain road after his own vehicle became stuck in snow. He said he spotted people with flashlights nearby, though he could not identify them. These sightings raised the possibility that someone else may have been involved. The case has also been compared to Dyatlov Pass because of the combination of multiple victims, unusual circumstances, and unexplained behavior. Like Dyatlov, the Yuba County Five seemed to abandon logic in critical moments, leaving investigators puzzled. For the families, the tragedy was devastating. They struggled not only with the loss of their loved ones, but with the absence of clear answers. Gary Mathias's family, in particular, has continued to live with uncertainty, as his fate remains unknown. For the other 4 families, the knowledge that their sons died slowly in the wilderness has been a lasting pain. Over the years, journalists and true crime enthusiasts have revisited the case, analyzing evidence and proposing theories. Documentaries and podcasts have kept the story alive, emphasizing the eerie, unanswered questions. Why did the men drive into the mountains? Why abandon a working car? Why fail to use available supplies? And what happened to Gary Mathias? The Yuba County Sheriff's Department still lists the case as open, though after more than 4 decades, the likelihood of new evidence emerging is slim. Advances in forensic technology, such as genetic testing, might one day shed light on Matthias's fate if remains are ever located. Until then, the case remains unresolved. What makes the Yuba County Five case so disturbing is not only the deaths, but the inexplicable decisions. These were not inexperienced teenagers, but grown men who had families and responsibilities. They were excited about an upcoming Special Olympics basketball event, suggesting they had every reason to return home. Yet a series of choices led them into the mountains and ultimately to tragedy. The absence of clear motives or explanations keeps the mystery alive. Today, the Yuba County Five are remembered both locally and nationally as victims of one of the strangest cold cases in American history. The case serves as a reminder that even in modern times, with organized search efforts and official investigations, some mysteries remain unsolved. Whether their deaths were the result of misadventure, mental illness, foul play, or circumstances still unknown, the story of the Yuba County Five continues to haunt those who study cold cases and unsolved crimes.